your best-selling book is called The Gift of Fear. And it, for people who haven't read it, A, you need to, and B, it's about how fear is a gift, that intuition, that sort of that the hairs on the back of your neck rising up when you see somebody. Listen to them. Listen to that. That's something instinctual inside of you that's telling you you're in danger. But fear can be exploited by bad people or powerful people with bad motives politically and culturally in a way where maybe it's not so much of a gift. So expand on that.
Sure. The issue is it true fear or unwarranted fear? So my book and the benefits of intuition, by the way, intuition, the root of the word inter, means to guard and protect. And that's what it does for us, our intuition, which knows everything much more than we do. It knows the distance of the sound and the scent of the smell and whether we saw that person earlier and whether that's the same car that was there earlier. It knows all kinds of things that we haven't consciously assessed. But the issue is it true fear or unwarranted fear? So I'll give a very quick description of those two. True fear is always something in your environment that you sense. You see it, you hear it, you smell it, you touch it. That is true fear. And the unwarranted fear is always based on your imagination or your memory, something in your imagination or your memory. So I'll give you a real example. You're at the airport, you're about to board a flight, and you get that feeling that sometimes people get, which is, don't board this flight, this plane's going to crash, etc. If that is based on, a news video you saw of a crash in Caracas, Venezuela 3 months ago, that is unwarranted fear based on memory or imagination. But if it's based on seeing the two pilots stumble out of the bar drunk and board your flight, that's true fear because it's something you sense in your environment. It's a somewhat comedic example of the thing, but the point stands, which is that true fear is always something in your environment that you sense, and unwarranted fear is always something that you imagine or you remember. And so when we are presented with something to fear by a government or a corporation or a friend or a spouse, when we are presented with fears that someone is trying to program into us, we have to always ask the question, why are they doing it? Number one, and to really dig in and understand the fear. So for example, fear of COVID, or before it mad cow disease, or before it flesh-eating disease, or before it Y2K, or before it killer bees, or anything else that we are being encouraged to fear. And we have to learn and understand. And that's why, in the blurb that I did for Bobby Kennedy's book, I said, you don't have to agree or disagree with anything, but you have an obligation in a democracy to learn the details associated anytime they tell you to fear something. So when we're told to fear the terrible enemy that's coming, George Bush, we got to take the fight to them, weapons of mass destruction. Well, 700,000 people killed in Iraq. Untold billions, thousands of our own troops killed, and there weren't weapons of mass destruction. So, all right, then why did you want us to have that fear of Hussein sending over terrorists? We want to know why, and we want to fully understand it. So in the present moment, we're told originally, fear COVID, protect your children. I don't think there's one healthy child in America, not one, that has provably died from COVID. You have kids in the hospital dying, and COVID is part of what they have and likely part of what killed them if they're already sick. But what we needed to hear
if I can just say that the problem with that is they haven't released the information. The hospitals all along have been just doing deaths from COVID in the hospitals as opposed to dying from COVID in the hospitals. And only very, very late in the game did any one of them try to start making that distinction. And same thing with the children. They wouldn't tell us how many had comorbidities. They just tried to scare us. So I understand the confusion on this. It's like we still don't have accurate data. Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, it's true. And I've got a video of even Fauci explaining that some of the people whose deaths are attributed to COVID or hospitalizations are attributed to COVID might be there for appendicitis, but they also tested positive for COVID. So that's with COVID versus from COVID, which is an important issue. But on my main point, in the beginning of COVID, like in the beginning of, after 9/11 with terrorism, what happens is events happen. So 9/11 happened. And then everybody comes forward to see how can they exploit it. Example, I was giving a speech for the federal government in D.C. for directors of security for all the federal agencies. And in the middle, I gave one speech, then I did a Q&A, and then I gave a closing comment. And in between, there was a break. And a guy came up to me and said, boy, I really agree with you. You're really doing great stuff. I said, oh, what do you do? He said, I'm with a company that, whatever the name of it was, that reinforces federal buildings with extra concrete and bulletproof windows. I said, I said, that's interesting because in the entire history of the country, there's only been one incident of a federal building being attacked. So he said, no, you're wrong. It's like wearing a seatbelt. I said, brother, that's nothing like wearing a seatbelt. Spending $300 million to reinforce a building when it's only happened once in our history is not like wearing a seatbelt where you have thousands of people killed in cars every year. And so that company comes forward to exploit, let's say 9/11. What happened? Every building in New York suddenly had security asking for ID. You remember, you were there asking for ID before you go into the building. But that's not what happened at 9/11. Airplanes were flown into buildings at 9/11. And asking for ID does not prevent an airplane from hitting your building. So it's never a match. The exploitation method is rarely a match for what actually happened, but is always a match for the fear. The fear will always be exploited. In COVID in the beginning, we're told instant death, you're going to drop dead on the street. Look at this footage from somebody falling down in China. But the reality was that our children and our teens and people in their 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, if they were healthy, had very, very low risk of death from COVID. And that's just the reality. That hasn't changed. But Americans weren't told that. They were told the opposite. Where were the leaders who would say, you're going to be fine? Yeah. You're going to be all right.
We had South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem on earlier this week. She was one of the few. I mean, reading up on her backstory, she just has a book out called Not My First Rodeo. She was one of the few. She was bold, and it was because of these first principles she knew as a person who would lead, saying, trust the people, trust the people and the actual people. She lives in a state of ranchers and farmers who know the land and they know how to take care of themselves, and they don't need big government telling them go left or go right. And it turned out to be such a great example, right? It's like my state, New York, went a different way.
It's actually been one of my teachings. I don't mean teachings by me, but I mean teachings that I've received in the last 2 years, which is I was as bigoted as anybody about the flyover states and just assumed that, only intelligent people lived on the two coasts. I don't mean it quite as bad as I'm making it sound, but it was somewhere in my DNA that the people, were somehow less able to make good decisions. But boy, have I learned through COVID that people intuitively, maybe 50%, maybe 60% of the country, if you went by the child vaccines, it might be 80% of the country, just intuitively don't want to give these vaccines to a 6-month-old, for God's sake, or a 3-year-old. And so I've learned the wisdom of the people that I've embraced much more in the last 2 years than I ever had before. I'm ashamed to admit, but also proud to acknowledge that I've come this distance. And, you mentioned Noem, and then there's DeSantis, right? Here you have a state, the Department of Health in Florida, by the way, run by a Harvard-trained doctor, Joe Ladapo. It's 13,000 people, the Department of Health. Florida is a huge state. I think it might be 22 or 25 million citizens. It's bigger than most countries on earth. And they've come to the decision to recommend against these vaccines for children. Are they mentally ill? Are they crazy? No, they're real public officials and public servants and elected officials who've looked at the information and made this decision. And I'm just disappointed that more states haven't done it.
If you're like me, you're growing more and more concerned about the future. The market's all over the place. Inflation's at its highest level in 40 years. Interest rates are skyrocketing. The news is not good. Market experts not only predict a recession, but they're using terms like economic hurricane and unprecedented. If you want to protect your future, call a precious metal dealer I trust, American Hartford Gold. They can show you how to protect your savings and retirement accounts by diversifying your portfolio with physical gold and silver. Everyone says that's what you need to do. All it takes to get started is a short phone call, and they will have physical gold and silver delivered right to your door or inside your IRA or 401k. And they keep it super simple. They're the highest rated firm in the country with an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau, and thousands of satisfied clients. And as an exclusive offer for my listeners and viewers, if you call them right now, they're going to give you $1,500, up to $1,500 of free silver and a free safe on qualifying orders. So don't wait. Call them now. Call 866-518-2955. That's 866-518-2955. Or just text my name, Megyn, Megyn, to 65532. Again, that's 866-518-2955 or text Megyn to 65532. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.